In the vast, unforgiving expanse of the African savanna, there is a rule older than memory itself. It requires no enforcement and needs no words. Every creature born into this landscape carries it in the deepest layer of its nervous system, passed down through millions of years of survival. When death approaches, you hide. You go still. You disappear into the grass and the shadow. Above all else, above lions, above leopards, above the crocodile in the river, and the hyena in the dark, you flee from the human. But what happens when the most primal force in nature collides head-on with millions of years of survival instinct? What happens when the choice is no longer between safety and danger, but between surrender and watching your children die? This is the story of a predator at the darkest moment of her existence. The cheetah, the most aerodynamically refined land animal that evolution has ever produced, is capable of reaching 110 kilometers per hour in under 3 seconds. She is the living embodiment of speed, but the same biology that made her the fastest animal on land also made her fragile in ways that few predators are. Her bones are hollow and light. She carries almost no excess mass. She cannot match a leopard in a sustained fight. When a cheetah is truly injured, deep tissue injured, the kind of injury that takes away her speed, she does not become a wounded predator who can still defend herself. She becomes prey. A mother cheetah, mortally wounded and losing ground with every heartbeat, made a decision that defies every principle of wildlife biology. She abandoned the hiding place that was her only protection. She dragged her shredded body across the blazing savanna, and she walked, deliberately, purposefully, with the last reserves of her will, directly toward her greatest fear. She did not go to attack. She went to ask for help. Stay with us until the very end, because what unfolds in the red dust of Namibia will permanently change the way you understand what it means to be a mother in the natural world. To truly feel the weight of what Siri did, you need to understand what it costs to be a mother cheetah on the African savanna. The statistics are brutal. Cheetah cubs face one of the highest mortality rates of any large predator's offspring on the continent. Lions kill them to eliminate future competition. Leopards are violently territorial. Hyenas raid dens the moment a mother's back is turned, and overarching all of it is the constant pressure of hunger, because a cheetah burns enormous energy in the chase, and a failed hunt is not a minor inconvenience. It is a step toward starvation. A mother cheetah raises her cubs entirely alone. There is no pride, no coalition, no family structure to share the weight. It is just her, her speed, and the narrowing margin between success and failure. Mark had spent 3 years as a veteran safari guide and conservationist working the perimeters of Otjiwarongo in central Namibia, a region that holds the largest remaining wild cheetah population on Earth and has become the global epicenter of conservation efforts for the species. Over those 3 years, he had watched a particular female from a respectful distance, documenting her territory and her hunting technique. He named her Siri. Siri was everything a cheetah was supposed to be: precise, patient, and ferociously fast. Not long before the disaster struck, she had given birth to her first litter. 3 cubs, impossibly small, each born with the distinctive silver mane that cheetah cubs carry in their early months, which mimics the coloring of the honey badger, one of the few animals that even lions prefer to leave alone. Then the savanna collected its debt. During a nocturnal pursuit, Siri crossed into the territory of a resident leopard. The encounter was brief and catastrophic. Leopards are built for close-quarters combat in a way cheetahs simply are not. Siri escaped. That was always what she was built for. But the escape cost her dearly. Her right rear leg had been torn open, the muscle shredded in a wound that began pulling in heat and bacteria within minutes of the attack. She reached her den. She pressed the wound with her tongue. She waited for the pain to ease. It did not ease. 5 days passed. 5 days in which Siri could not put weight on the leg, which meant she could not run, which meant she could not hunt. 5 days in which her cubs grew weaker in the den beside her, their cries shifting from ordinary hunger to something flatter and more frightening. The diminished sound of small bodies beginning to give up. 5 days in which the infection spread into her bloodstream and consumed her consciousness in slow waves of fever. She could hear her cubs through it all. Even through the fog, she could hear them. On the 5th evening, as the fever reached its worst and the last light left the sky, Siri stood up. The legs screamed at her. The ground beneath her feet tilted with fever. But she oriented herself toward the red dirt road that cut through her territory, the road where the human vehicles traveled, the boundary that every wild animal in the area had learned over years never to cross lightly. She crossed it. The dawn was just breaking when Mark's Jeep moved slowly along the patrol route. He was scanning the tree line with binoculars when he pressed the brakes hard enough to throw his coffee forward. In the middle of the dirt road, standing directly in his path, making no attempt to move, was a cheetah. He cut the engine and waited for the dust to settle. Then he recognized her. The tear-marked stripes on her face were as individual as a fingerprint, and he had memorized them over 3 years. It was Siri. But the animal in his road was not the Siri he knew. Her ribs pressed against her skin in sharp relief. Her coat was dull and matted. The leg he could see was held at the wrong angle, the fur around it dark and crusted. She trembled in the early light with the continuous, fine tremor of a body running on fever alone. He reached for his radio. Then Siri took 3 steps toward the Jeep and stopped beside his door. She tilted her head back, looked directly up into his face, and opened her mouth. What came out was not a threat. It was not a warning growl or a territorial display. It was a sound that Mark would describe with the same word for the rest of his life, regardless of who was listening. A plea. A long, rising, broken cry carrying in it the specific acoustics of total desperation. The sound of a creature that has exhausted every other option and arrived finally at the last one. She held his gaze for a moment with those fading yellow eyes. Then she stood and began to move, not away from him but sideways, toward the dense thorn scrub at the edge of the road. After 3 limping steps, she stopped and looked back. The message was as clear as language. "Follow me." Mark put down the radio. He opened the door and stepped onto the dirt. Every protocol he had followed for years told him to stay in the vehicle. But the calculus of that moment felt nothing like calculation. It felt like recognition. The understanding that what he was witnessing was not a dangerous animal. It was an animal communicating across the vast distance between species with everything it had left. He followed her into the scrub. Every few meters she collapsed, her body failing her momentarily, before forcing herself back upright with an effort that had nothing mechanical about it. Pure will being spent entirely on leading him somewhere he needed to be. 30 meters from the road, at the base of a twisted old thorn tree, she stopped. And this time, she did not get back up. Her body released itself all at once, and her breathing became the only sound. From the darkness of the dense brush above her came a rustling. Then 3 small faces appeared at the edge of the shadow, round-eyed, silver-maned, trembling with the urgent vibration of cubs who have been too hungry for too long and have just found the one thing that might fix it. They tumbled out and ran to their mother in a tangle of limbs, pressing their heads against her face, searching for milk her body no longer had. Siri lifted her head, a movement that cost her something visible, and extended her tongue to the forehead of the nearest cub. She licked him once, slowly with the tenderness of a gesture that knows it may be the last. Then her head fell back to the earth. She had done it. She had delivered her children into the only hands that could save them. The rest was no longer hers to carry. Mark was already on the radio. The emergency response team arrived in 15 minutes. The cubs were gently coaxed into heated transport boxes, young enough that the warmth was more compelling than the instinct to flee. Siri received emergency intravenous treatment in the field, antibiotics to begin fighting the infection that had spread far beyond the original wound, fluids to counter the dehydration that days of fever had produced, and a carefully dosed sedative to allow transport without triggering the cardiac stress that restraint can cause in large felids in severe shock. They loaded her onto a stretcher with the care you use for something irreplaceable. The next 72 hours were the kind that veterinary teams describe with cautious language and guarded eyes. Surgery on the leg lasted hours. Her blood values were alarming. The combined trauma of infection, dehydration, and the neurological stress of captivity produced a clinical picture that the lead veterinarian described that first night as critical with guarded prognosis. Nobody expected her to survive the second night. In an adjacent room behind a partition, her 3 cubs were bottle-fed every few hours. They ate. They slept. They played with the fumbling, joyful clumsiness of cubs who have not yet learned to coordinate their speed with any directional intent. They did not know that their mother was 20 meters away, fighting for the right to see them again. On the 4th morning, Siri's eyes opened. She came back to consciousness all at once, ears flat, muscles straining against the bandaging, every alarm system firing simultaneously. She was in a strange place with strange smells, and her cubs were not there. She began to fight the restraints with a focused, desperate energy that the monitors immediately reflected in climbing numbers. The team made a decision. Mark was called in. He walked through the door carrying a shallow woven basket, moving quietly. Siri saw him, and the growl building in her throat stalled. She knew this human. She had chosen him. Before the growl could reorganize, a sound came from the basket. The effect was immediate and total. Every tension in Siri's body changed quality simultaneously, from defensive rigidity to something that had no clinical name, but that everyone in that room recognized at once. The basket was set on the floor. 3 cubs came out in a cascade of overlapping limbs and found their mother in seconds, climbing her, purring against her neck and chest in that continuous, dense, resonant sound that filled the room like music. Siri closed her eyes. She wrapped her long legs around her cubs. She licked each of them in turn, methodical, thorough, the ritual of a mother re-establishing contact after an absence her body had felt as profound loss. The pact had been kept. She had trusted a stranger with the most precious thing she possessed, and the stranger had not failed her. Today, Siri lives under the protection of the rehabilitation sanctuary. The depth of the damage to her leg means the explosive, full-speed pursuit that defined her life in the wild is no longer available to her. She will not return to the open savanna as a free-ranging predator, but her cubs will. They are growing fast, their silver manes fading as they mature, their coordination sharpening from the fumbling of infancy into something increasingly lethal and precise. They are being prepared for gradual release into managed wild habitat. They will run at 110 kilometers per hour across open ground. They will hunt. They will have cubs of their own. They will live the life their mother bought for them on a red dirt road at dawn. Science is very good at measuring the cheetah. It has mapped her genome, modeled her aerodynamics, and calculated the precise metabolic cost of a maximum speed pursuit. It has done remarkable work in understanding what a cheetah is, but science struggles with what Siri did. Not because it is inexplicable in principle, researchers have documented wild animals seeking human help in states of injury, maternal behavior that overrides self-preservation in ways that defy simple modeling. The literature exists, and it is growing. But the literature cannot quite account for the specific quality of what happened at that thorn tree, the way an animal in the last hours of her life spent her remaining energy not on her own survival, but on navigation, on communication, on making absolutely certain that the people she was entrusting her children to actually found them. That is not instinct on autopilot. That is something that looks, with uncomfortable directness, like hope. She did not merely show us that animals feel desperation. She showed us what exists on the other side of desperation, something that believes, against all available evidence, that the situation can still change. That trust, extended even to the most feared presence in her world at the worst possible moment, might be the last move that changes everything. We want to know what this story sparked in you, not just in the comments, though please leave those, but in the quieter place where a story like this lands and stays. If Siri's story moved you, share it. Not for the numbers, but because stories like this one do something in the world when they travel. They remind people that the natural world is not a backdrop or a resource. It is full of Siris, animals living out dramas of love and sacrifice that most of us never get close enough to witness. Subscribe to this channel and join the community that chooses to stay close to those stories. Every week, we bring you the ones worth carrying, because out there in the Namibian bush, at the base of a twisted thorn tree, A dying mother looked up at a human face and saw something worth trusting. The least we can do is be worth it.